Hi, everyone. Jonathan, do you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Jonathan Hammond. I head up the Unilever Foundry, which I'll tell you a bit more about in a minute. Maybe as a show of hands, who's heard of Unilever? Okay, it's a good sign. Doesn't count the Unilever people over there. Who's head of the Unilever Foundry? Main reason why I'm here is hopefully more hands up next time we ask this question next year.
And it's why I'm here too, because I'm just discovering Unilever Foundry, which is 3 years old, and it's because you're primarily sort of Europe focused, and you're kind of now looking to expand your footprint a little bit more in the U.S.
Yeah, so it's probably worth giving a bit of a background on kind of why we have the Unilever Foundry and then where we've been to date. So, as you said, we're 4 years old in May this year, so it's been a bit of a journey for us. But essentially, Unilever is the world's second largest advertiser. We sell over 400 brands into over 190 countries around the world, and every day, 2.5 billion consumers use a Unilever product. So a quarter of the world every day uses a Unilever product. So there's a huge opportunity there to basically be pioneering the future, to be moving markets in a certain direction, because there are many markets or categories with which we are kind of majority shareholder in as well. Share market, I should say, not shareholder. But basically, we decided to launch the Unilever Foundry 4 years ago because what we were seeing was it wasn't just the taxi industry or the hoteling industry that was being disrupted, but there was the brands and categories with which we play in were also being disrupted. And so we launched the Unilever Foundry to make sure that we were looking for those disruptors and partnering with them earlier on for mutual win-win relationships on a partnership level. And so over the course of the 4 years that we've had Foundry, we've run over 150 pilots. And so it's very much about testing and learning and understanding what types of technologies, what types of startups are going to work best for Unilever, to help us communicate with consumers, to help us understand consumers, to look for new business models, new revenue streams, and these sorts of things, in order to make our business even more successful.
So I want to talk about those pilots, but first, and I realize that you have nothing to little to do with this, but I just want to applaud Unilever for sort of putting Facebook and Google on notice. I think it's great. They said yesterday, I believe, that if they weren't sort of more proactive about cleaning up toxic content, that Unilever was going to pull its advertising, which is like billions of dollars worth of ads, which is a huge move.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I mean, as you said, it's not really the area that I deal with. Facebook is one of our biggest media partners globally, and I guess we're more focused on the startup space.
Right.
So typically we're interested in companies that have maybe had a round or two of funding, so Series A or Series B. They've kind of got a proven technology. They're ready to test and scale with a company of Unilever's size.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about these pilots. So first of all, how can people apply to enter into this pilot program?
Sure. Yeah, so I mean, on one side we are, I guess, the open door for startups to come into, to basically say, this is my business, this is what we do, and this is how we can help Unilever. And then on the other side, internally we take brand or business challenges and opportunities and briefs, and then we'll go out and proactively scout versus those challenges and look for innovative solutions that might be able to solve that problem. So a good example in the marketing and ad tech space is user-generated content. So we run the Magnum Pleasure Stores. So Magnum is one of our big global brands. It's a €1 billion brand, a big ice cream brand. And basically every year we do the Pleasure Stores, which is a pop-up ice cream bar. And for us, millions or thousands of consumers come to these stores around the world, and they take great photos and they put them up onto their Instagram and Facebook feeds, and we never see them again. But what user-generated content allows us to do is to find those images and get the rights to use them, and then use them on our own platforms as well. And there's two benefits there for Unilever. The first one is it means that we are having to spend less money on doing brand-generated content via maybe traditional agency partners. And then the second major benefit for Unilever as well is actually user-generated content outperforms brand-generated content on the whole. So we're actually getting more effective and more efficient content in that way.
That's great. So you worked with a startup to sort of pull some of that user-generated content into your sort of platform, or how did a startup sort of impact that, or you're looking for help with
Yeah, so we have found a number of those UGC providers already, and so yes, we would take that brief, and the brief was, how do you create more engagement from the Magnum stores, and we would go out and scout looking for various technologies that might be able to solve that. We found a few partners in the space of UGC, and we piloted it. That same partner ended up being invested in by Unilever Ventures, which is another benefit of kind of partnering with the Unilever Foundry. And then we look to take that to scale. So the same partner is now being rolled out within the internal frameworks of Unilever.
Okay, that's great. So you talked about sort of proactive versus reactive. You're being pitched on some things. In other cases, you know exactly what you need and you're out looking for the startup. What percentage is sort of proactive versus, I guess, reactive?
Yeah, I'd say it's probably about 70% taking briefs from the business and 30% proactive. So being at great events like this and getting to meet some fantastic startups, hopefully we'll bring some of those back into the business and get them to engage. But it's really important that the briefs or the projects that we're working on are aligned to the business challenges and the objectives of what Unilever is trying to accomplish.
So would founders be smart to sort of tailor their pitch to a specific brand? And did you say you have 400 brands, or did I mishear? Okay. So it would be wise if they wanted to work with you to sort of say, look, this product of yours, I think I can help you sell detergent in this way. Or what's sort of like a great strategy these guys might want to.
Yeah, that's exactly one of the ways that it can work. It's always good to help the brand teams to understand how their technology can help. But that's essentially one of the roles of why we have the Foundry as well, is to help turn startup speak into corporate speak and vice versa. Because there's a bit of a disconnect there at times, and that's a lot of the job of the team, to help our brand teams, our functional teams, to understand what the benefit is that startup brings, and then translate it. But it's always good because this UGC technology I mentioned before, if you showed that as for Magnum, that same technology also works for Dove, it works for Ben & Jerry's, it works for Dermalogica, and all our other brands that we have on a global scale.
Sure, that's great. And I want to hear about more specific examples just to bring this whole program to life. But tell me more how it works. So I am a startup, I reach out to you, you accept me into the program. What happens now?
Yeah, so we put all of our briefs live on the website. And startups basically apply for them. We then run, obviously, a vetting process to understand which startups that we want to, take through to the next stage within the gate. And we basically start quite wide, where we look at lots of different technology types. So as another example, we've had briefs before. It's like, how can I better engage with my ice cream cabinets? We've got 3.5 million ice cream cabinets around the world. They do a good job of keeping ice cream cold, but they don't really do much else. What else could we be doing with that square foot space in stores? So we will open up that box of unknown unknowns and take the brand team or the functional team on that journey to understand the technologies that could be in that space and the startups that have applied directly to be a part of that. And then we start to funnel it down until we get to a top 5. Those 5 would come to a pitch day and pitch directly to any of the key stakeholders for that brief. And then basically we would look to set up a pilot with one or more of those partners.
And then do you need somebody sort of like, excuse me, I'm so sorry, getting up a cold. Do you need somebody on site, or does the startup, how closely do you work together and over what kind of a period of time?
Sure. A period of time, it varies by pilot. Some we have that dock straight into a campaign that's already up and running and it's fixed for 2 or 3 months. Others where things like disruptive business models, so we're doing a lot of pilots into laundry services or digital laundry services. We have a big laundry business outside the US where the pilot is actually a 3-year pilot, so it varies. There's no requirement for them to be based in the same location as us, although we do have a co-working space in Singapore called Level 3, which is 22,000 square feet and houses 250 desks and startups, so kind of imagine a WeWorks, but inside of Unilever offices, and the idea being that proximity breeds collaboration. But it's not a prerequisite. Basically, the startups that we're looking for have enough of a business that they're able to, continue on with what they're doing. They're not beholden to Unilever for their survival.
And is there any money involved?
Yeah, of course. So the partnership works in a supplier-client relationship. So in the same way that we would pay one of our more traditional partners, we would pay basically to perform the pilot, and then the idea being that if that's successful, that can lead to a larger scale partnership or investment from Unilever Ventures, or maybe further down the line, some sort of greater ownership.
So I think I heard you say that there have been 150 pilots so far. How many of those companies have gone on to receive money from Unilever Ventures?
Yeah, so I mean, the hurdles that ventures have are a bit different to the hurdles that we have, and often with the startups that we're working with, they're not interested in looking and getting investment straight away from us. So of the 150, we're now actively looking to scale about 30 of these across the company, and I'd say probably about 10 to 15 of those have had investment from ventures.
Okay, and how does that work? Is they sort of, is the Unilever team sort of part of those pitch days, or do you say, I think this is sort of like in your sweet spot to the Unilever's team, which I realize is very separate?
Yeah, so I mean, we essentially work with them hand in hand. So if a company is getting a lot of traction within Unilever and running a lot of pilots, then we will often suggest to ventures that they might want to look at them from an investment perspective, and vice versa. If ventures has invested in them, then it could be of benefit for Unilever to pilot with them as well.
Okay, and then sort of in addition to them being a customer of yours during this pilot program, what are you helping them with? I assume you're helping them with sort of marketing intelligence, or am I mistaken? Is Unilever sort of like applying its marketing muscle to these companies, or is that not part of what they're looking for?
Yeah, so I mean, on one side, and I think this ties into kind of hopefully what we're here to talk about, which is a bit why kind of startups and businesses should be working together. So, on our side, we bring big global brands, scale, equity, marketing budgets, potentially investment, these sorts of things. A good example is a home cleaning service, on-demand cleaning service called Helpling in Europe, which is getting a lot of kind of traction in Europe. But say they've got 200,000, 300,000 clients. That's fantastic. But the reality is we have big global brands like Cif or Domestos that are home cleaning brands that have millions of consumers that know those brands and carry really strong equity with them. And so by partnering and licensing our brand to that startup, which we've done in this case, we've licensed our cleaning brand called Cif, we've actually been able to show that for the startup, it lowers the cost of acquisition for attaining new clients or new customers. So because that Cif brand brings that equity, we're able to show that it's actually a mutually beneficial relationship for both the startup and for Unilever.
And that's so interesting. So, I wouldn't necessarily think of Unilever as interested in a sort of like an on-demand cleaning service, but the idea is that you want to maintain you want to maintain a sort of a stronghold on your customer. You don't know if your customer is going to be using your products if this on-demand company is sort of in between. Is that kind of the idea, like shifting consumer usage, or can you maybe sort of explain the theme there?
I think the reality is everyone talks about Uber and Airbnb and Spotify and the like and what they've done to their categories, but there are disruptors that are happening to ours potentially as well. And so I guess rather than waiting for those companies to become that size, let's go out and find them first off and think about how we can collaborate and partner with them straight away. And so the other thing is, as well, is certainly in the Western world, we are becoming more and more urbanized, more and more people are living in cities. They're starting to outsource these sorts of things, these services to others, so they're not cleaning their homes as much, they're not washing their own laundry. So imagine if you as a consumer, you live in San Francisco, and your washing gets picked up and dropped off from work and home, and it's clean. You don't really care if it's washed by a Unilever brand or if it's washed by someone else. Now, if those types of services reach a certain percentage of penetration, I guess the question is, what role do our brands play in that future? So for us, that kind of disruptive business model is really about testing and learning, understanding, is laundry services or cleaning services a viable business model, and how and where should we play in it?
That's really interesting. Okay, so what other sort of industries interest you? Are you, when you sort of do this proactive research, are there sort of like certain sectors that you're targeting that would be helpful to the audience here to know about?
Yeah, sure. So, we scout across a few different verticals, broadly kind of marketing and ad tech, so how do we better communicate with consumers? Consumer insights, how do we better understand consumers? Product and ingredients, so like the types of food technologies. We have a very big foods business. What sort of food tech is happening in that space? Enterprise technology, so how do we help Unilever to operate better, faster, stronger as an organization behind maybe the brands? Sustainability, which is a big angle for Unilever as well. So in the same way that you have ad tech startups disrupting the way in which we communicate with consumers, you have sustainability-focused startups that are disrupting the way in which traditional charities or sustainable businesses are operating. And then this kind of disruptive business model pillar as well. which really enables our brands to extend off the supermarket shelf. So an example of this is kind of Signal, which is our oral care brand in France. Basically partnered with a company called Playbrush. For those of you who have kids, you know how hard it is to get your kids to brush their teeth. It's very much a routine and a chore. Playbrush has developed this kind of device or dongle that goes on the end of the toothbrush, and your kid has to brush all the corners of their mouth basically to play the game because it connects to a smartphone. So the kid has to basically brush everywhere in order to pass a level on the smartphone game. So it's really turning something that was into a chore into a gamified experience. Now, nobody in Unilever was working on a dongle that goes on the end of a toothbrush that enables us to gamify toothbrushing. But the reality is somebody out there was. But unfortunately, fortunately is, by finding them, we're able to take that product to market a lot quicker than Playbrush were able to themselves. And we're able to tap into innovation and ideas outside the business that, wasn't really existing within the four walls of Unilever.
I think I need that product for my kids. Now, I'm sorry if I missed it because you're talking sort of fast, but did you say at what stage the companies, you're sort of, you said they're not necessarily looking for venture funding when you're talking with them. So are these sort of like Series B stage companies, or how mature are they?
Yeah, so typically they've had a few rounds of funding, so Series A or Series B. Sometimes they're still at seed stage or angel investor, but by and large they have a proven technology, they have a go-to-market strategy, and they're ready to work with a company the size of Unilever. We find that if we get involved too early on, then often, the relationship just doesn't work because they're not ready to work with a company the size of Unilever, and Unilever is not patient enough to work with a company that maybe doesn't have product market fit or a go-to-market strategy.
Mm-hmm. And during the course of your sort of partnership, these pilot programs, I guess, if you're not in a co-working space, as you mentioned in Singapore, what does that relationship look like? I mean, how sort of closely, not aligned, but are you sort of like having weekly meetings, or what can the startup expect?
I mean, it varies on a pilot basis, but ultimately, again, some of these more integral pilots, like a disruptive business model pilot, we would spend probably a lot more hands-on and working a lot closer with the startup versus maybe an ad tech or a mad tech startup, which is a bit more plug and play into our media plans and the like. So it really varies by pilot, but often it's just managing and making sure that whichever way it is, that from a startup's perspective, we're not using up a lot of their time and resource, because we appreciate that decisions and activity happens a lot faster at the startup level than it does at a kind of big corporate level. And so we need to make sure that we're cognizant of that. We need to make sure that we have the right payment terms from a procurement perspective, the right scope of work, and legal setup. So everything we do needs to be different to the way that traditional Unilever operates in order to make sure we're providing a beneficial relationship to the startup. I loved the helping example and the dongle example. How many companies? I mean, I guess what on a percentage basis? What's the startup's chance of getting into the program? So 150. How many sort of companies have you looked at altogether? Thousands. Over 10,000, I'd say. So, as we know, there are thousands of startups out there, and so we need to make sure that we are kind of canvassing them. And while many in the room maybe haven't heard of Unilever Foundry before, we've probably looked at a lot of these companies, and maybe they aren't aware of the fact that we've looked at them because we use third-party scouts, or we use kind of online tools to help us to research and understand who they might be.
Oh, that's interesting about the scouts. Where are the scouts? And also, because I haven't heard much about Unilever. So are the companies, or not Unilever itself, but the Foundry. So have you primarily funded companies in Europe, or do you have companies here in the U.S. that you're working with right now?
Yeah, we have scouts all over the world. So Tel Aviv, London, Singapore, the US, China. We have basically partners that help us in lots of markets all over the world.
And are these investors, or are these Unilever employees?
No, so they're third-party scouts. So their job is basically to help us do a lot of the legwork, to help find the right companies, to understand, which ones are ready to work with Unilever, maybe which ones aren't quite ready just yet.
Okay. We have apparently like 3 minutes left, and I wanted to see if anyone in the audience had any questions. Oh, great. Do we have another microphone, or should I just hand mine over? Wait, yeah. She's got
Hello. Dollar Shave Club. I believe you guys paid $1 billion for that. Are you seeing that as the first example of the Unilever Foundry, something that you have this foundry so you can avoid those types of scenarios? Or is there a different relationship? Like, if the Dollar Shave Club had been through the Unilever Foundry, would you have paid a heck of a lot less?
Good question. So Dollar Shave Club is nothing to do with the Unilever Foundry. So we split Unilever into 4 pillars, so build, partner, acquire, and invest. So the build is the obvious part, so that's traditional Unilever, where we are building products from scratch or services from scratch. Partner is where Foundry sits, which is a partnership model. Invest is obviously Unilever Ventures, and then acquire is our corporate M&A team, which is where the Dollar Shave Club came in. I'd say all 4 areas have their pros and cons and their benefits. In the future, could a Helpling become a Dollar Shave Club that maybe we go on to acquire potentially? But certainly for us, I guess we're thinking about how can partnership lead to one of those other routes at a later time. So, for example, in the case of Helpling, via partnership, we've actually made an investment via Unilever Ventures in them as well. We can understand how cleaning services can work, how we can make it a viable business model, and how we can play in that space. We can then either say, okay, well, should we continue in a longer-term partnership with these parties? Should we acquire them wholly, or should we continue down the investment route, or do we say, well, actually, we're going to build ourselves now from scratch? So it's really a way for us to learn, to understand, and then to decide which route of the kind of innovation funnel to go after.
Yes. Oh, hold on. You take mine.
That's easy. Thank you. Yeah, thanks. So what percentage of business is service related versus product related that you support, or that? Yeah.
Sure. So the majority of our pilots, the 150 or so pilots that we've run to date, have really been in the area of kind of marketing and ad tech, so often SaaS, digital type tools that we're using to better communicate with consumers. Where we're seeing a lot of growth now, or a lot more briefs and interest come from our brands, is in this disruptive business model space, so the services part of the area as well. And I think constantly our brands are thinking, how can they extend off the supermarket shelf? How can they take up, I guess, as more and more brands now are becoming services that wrap around our lives. So if you think of how you use Uber and Airbnb and the like, it's a service that wraps around your life. What role do our brands play in that future, and how can they become services that wrap around a consumer's life? So I'd say services is probably the second pillar after the kind of marketing and ad tech area. And then from a product and ingredients perspective, certainly an area that we're looking at a lot, but is much, much tougher probably to make inroads in, because there are a lot more hurdles, as you would imagine, when you're starting to involve manufacturing and supply chain and the like. It can make it a bit tougher to get to market, and also a lot tougher to pilot very quickly when you're having to change things on the manufacturing line.
I think we've got to go, but maybe last question, just in case there's anybody in the audience who fits the bill. Is there anything sort of on your to-do list right now that you could tell us about?
Yeah, I mean, we're working on a project at the moment around digital dentistry. Mm-hmm. So how do you basically make dentistry an online platform? Now, you might be thinking, well, I don't have anything to do with dentistry, but potentially the technology that you have could help to provide that service. So how can we take that online? We have a big oral care business. How can we make sure that we are set up to succeed in that space and provide a service for consumers to extend our brand there?
Great. Thank you, Jonathan. So
Thank
nice
you.
to meet you.